The fluorescent lights of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport cast sterile shadows across Terminal C as Lieutenant Commander Marcus Vance pressed his hand against the exit wound that refused to stop bleeding. The Navy SEAL had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, had pulled men from burning vehicles, had walked away from helicopter crashes that should have killed him. But here, in the antiseptic anonymity of civilian life, he was dying from a traffic accident that happened in the airport parking garage. His vision tunneled. The crowd parted around him like water around stone, passengers averting their eyes from the spreading crimson on the polished floor. Someone was screaming for help. Someone was filming. No one was moving closer. Then she appeared. A young woman in surgical scrubs, probably 26, with dark auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She dropped to her knees beside him without hesitation, her hands already moving with purpose. "Sir, I need you to stay with me," she said, her voice steady and clear. Her fingers found the wound, applying pressure with exactly the right amount of force. Not the fumbling panic of a bystander with first aid training. This was something else. Marcus tried to focus on her face, but his vision was failing. He caught a glimpse of green eyes, intense and focused, scanning his injuries with professional assessment. "Radial pulse is weak," she said to herself, then louder. "Someone call 911 and tell them we have arterial bleeding, possible internal trauma. Patient is going into shock." Her hands never stopped moving. She was using his own belt now, creating a tourniquet with practiced efficiency that seemed beyond what a civilian nurse should possess. Marcus had been treated by combat medics in firefights, had watched Navy corpsmen work miracles under impossible conditions. This woman moved like them. She worked like them. But she was too young to have served in the sandbox, and her technique was too current, too refined. "What's your name?" he managed to gasp. She didn't answer, too focused on keeping him alive. Someone handed her a jacket, and she packed the wound with expert precision. The airport police arrived, then paramedics with a stretcher. The woman in scrubs stepped back, letting the EMTs take over, giving them a rapid-fire brief on his condition that used terminology Marcus barely understood through his fading consciousness. He tried to see her face one more time to remember his savior, but she was already disappearing into the crowd. The last thing Marcus saw before losing consciousness was the small winged insignia partially visible beneath her scrub collar when she turned. Naval Aviator Wings. Gold, not silver. Carrier qualified. And something else, a unit patch he couldn't quite make out. Then darkness took him, and the mystery woman vanished into the terminal like smoke. Marcus Vance woke 3 days later in Presbyterian Hospital, Dallas, his abdomen held together with surgical staples and enough pain medication to drop a horse. The doctor explained how lucky he was. The makeshift pressure dressing and tourniquet had saved his life. Without immediate intervention, he would have bled out in the terminal. The airport police had no record of who helped him. Security footage showed a woman in scrubs, but her face was obscured by the angle and the crowd. She had disappeared before giving a statement. No one knew her name. The nurses brought him cards from well-wishers, fellow SEALs who had heard about his close call. But Marcus couldn't stop thinking about those hands, that calm voice, those movements that spoke of training far beyond civilian emergency medicine. On the 5th day, his commanding officer visited. Captain Richard Walsh sat beside the hospital bed with the uncomfortable expression of a man who hated medical facilities. "You're trending on Twitter," Walsh said without preamble. "Someone filmed the whole thing, posted it with the caption, 'Rookie Nurse Saves Navy SEAL at Airport.' It has 3 million views." He pulled out his phone, showed Marcus the grainy footage. There she was, kneeling beside him, working with absolute focus. The video ended with her walking away, but someone had zoomed in on the final frame. The aviator wings were clearly visible now, and beneath them, partially obscured but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for, was a unit patch that made Marcus's blood run cold. VFA 103, the Jolly Rogers, Strike Fighter Squadron 103, FA-18 Super Hornets, carrier-based, combat deployments. "That's not a rookie nurse," Marcus said quietly. Walsh nodded, his expression grim. "No, that's Lieutenant Kira Volkov, Call sign Reaper, and she's not supposed to exist. The story began 3 years earlier in the ready room of the USS Theodore Roosevelt, cruising somewhere in the Persian Gulf. Lieutenant Kira Volkov sat in the back row during the mission brief, her presence acknowledged by no one except through deliberate silence. She was the only woman in Strike Fighter Squadron 103, the first female pilot to qualify for the Jolly Rogers in its 70-year history. The squadron had accepted her arrival with the enthusiasm of men receiving a mandatory sensitivity training briefing. The mission commander, Commander Jake "Hammer" Morrison, stood at the front of the ready room beside a digital display showing satellite imagery of the Iraqi-Syrian border. Intelligence indicates a high-value target is moving through this corridor at 0300 local time, Hammer said, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone who had done this 100 times before. We'll have a force ship on station for close air support if ground teams make contact. Reaper, you'll be flying wing. It wasn't a question. It was never a question. Kira was always flying wing, always in the supporting role, never trusted with the complex mission planning or weapons release authority that the male pilots handled routinely. She had the same training, the same qualifications, had scored higher than half the squadron on the carrier qualification evaluation. None of it mattered. "Copy," Kira said, her voice level and professional. No emotion, no protest. She had learned in her first week that complaints only confirmed their suspicions that she couldn't handle the pressure. Better to fly perfectly, execute every order with precision, and let her performance speak. Except her performance never spoke loudly enough. The brief continued with tactical details, weapons loadouts, refueling tracks, and emergency procedures. Kira took notes on her kneeboard card, memorizing call signs and frequencies. When the brief ended, the other pilots filed out, talking among themselves, making plans for the mission. No one spoke to her. She gathered her gear alone and headed for the Paraloft to suit up. The flight deck of a nuclear aircraft carrier at night is a carefully choreographed ballet of controlled chaos. Jet engines screamed. Catapult crews moved between aircraft with practiced efficiency. The air smelled of jet fuel and salt spray. Kira walked through it all toward her FA-18E Super Hornet, her helmet bag slung over one shoulder. The aircraft was beautiful in the functional way of military equipment designed for a single deadly purpose. 44,000 pounds of thrust, capable of Mach 1.8, armed with everything from precision-guided munitions to air-to-air missiles. Her crew chief, Petty Officer Martinez, was doing final checks on the external stores. "She's ready for you, Lieutenant," Martinez said, offering a crisp salute. He was one of the few people on the ship who treated her like any other pilot. Kira returned the salute and began her walk-around inspection, checking control surfaces, weapons pylons, and intake covers with methodical attention. Flying was the only part of this life that made sense. In the cockpit, skill mattered. Physics didn't care about gender politics or squadron social dynamics. Either you flew the aircraft correctly, or you didn't. The jet didn't have opinions about who was sitting in the seat. She climbed the ladder and settled into the ejection seat, the familiar ritual of strapping and providing a moment of calm. 5-point harness, comm cord, oxygen connection, helmet secured. She ran through the startup checklist with practiced efficiency, bringing the Super Hornet to life. The twin engines spooled up with a rising whine that she felt through the airframe. On the radio, Hammer's voice crackled through her headset. "Jolly Rogers flight check-in." One by one, the other pilots confirmed their aircraft were ready. When it came to Kira's turn, she pressed the transmit switch. "Reaper's up." The reply was silence, then Hammer's voice again, moving on to the next checklist item as if she hadn't spoken. It was a small thing, easy to dismiss as radio traffic or timing, but it happened every time. The message was clear. The catapult shot was violent and exhilarating. 4.2 seconds of controlled fury that hurled 40,000 pounds of aircraft from 0 to 160 knots. Kira's Super Hornet roared off the bow of the Roosevelt into the black Persian Gulf night, climbing into a moonless sky where the stars stretched horizon to horizon. She banked into her assigned position in the formation, settling into comfortable trail as Hammer led them north toward the Iraqi border. The cockpit displays glowed green and amber in the darkness, showing her everything she needed to know: airspeed, altitude, fuel state, weapons status. 4 other aircraft on her radar scope, friendly blue icons in a loose tactical formation. The flight to the mission area took 37 minutes, cruising at 28,000 feet above the desert. Below them, Iraq was a dark expanse broken by occasional clusters of light marking cities and towns. The radio chatter was minimal, professional, limited to position updates and fuel checks. Kira monitored 3 different frequencies simultaneously, listening to the tactical command net, the strike frequency, and the emergency guard channel. Standard procedure. She was good at this part. The technical aspects of naval aviation came naturally to her. Navigation, systems management, tactical employment, aerial refueling. She had been top of her class at the RAG, the replacement air group where Nugget pilots learned to fly the Super Hornet. Her instructors had written fitness reports praising her airmanship and tactical judgment. Those reports hadn't helped her reputation in the squadron. "Jolly Rogers, this is Overlord," a new voice said on the tactical frequency. The E-2 Hawkeye early warning aircraft orbiting somewhere to the south, managing the air battle. "We have a developing situation at the target area. Ground team is in contact. Stand by for tasking." Hammer acknowledged. Kira checked her weapons, made sure everything was armed and ready. She carried 4 GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack munitions, GPS-guided bombs that could hit within meters of their intended target. In her training, she had dropped practice versions dozens of times, had scored perfect hits on target ranges, but she had never released a weapon in combat. The squadron had made sure of that. Every mission profile assigned her to the least critical role, the backup position, the reserve aircraft that would only engage if everyone else was Winchester or damaged. The radio came alive with urgent traffic. Ground forces were taking heavy fire from a fortified position. The Joint Terminal Attack Controller, a Special Forces soldier embedded with the unit, was calling for immediate air support. Hammer acknowledged and began coordinating the attack run. "Reaper, maintain high cover," he said. "We'll prosecute the target." Kira rogered the instruction, climbing to 35,000 feet while Hammer and the other 3 pilots descended to attack altitude. She watched her radar scope as they rolled in, saw their altitude decrease, watched them execute the attack with precision. Bombs away, multiple secondaries. The JTAC confirmed targets destroyed, friendlies were safe, situation under control. Another successful mission for the Jolly Rogers. Another night where Kira Volkov flew thousands of miles and contributed nothing except her presence as a 4th spare. The flight back to the carrier was silent. Kira ran the fuel calculations in her head, confirmed they had enough gas to make the ship without hitting the tanker. The approach to the carrier at night is one of the most demanding tasks in military aviation. No horizon, no external references, just instruments and the barely visible outline of the ship, a postage stamp of light in an ocean of darkness. Kira entered the pattern, configured the aircraft for landing, called the ball when she acquired the optical landing system. The landing signal officers talked her down with calm, professional voices. She caught the 3-wire with a controlled crash that slammed her forward into the harness. Another perfect trap. Her 15th night landing since joining the squadron. All perfect, all ignored. Maintenance debrief took 20 minutes. Mission debrief took another hour. The squadron crowded into the ready room while Hammer walked through the tactical employment and weapons effects. Kira sat in the back, taking notes, saying nothing. Her contribution to the debrief consisted of confirming her fuel state and weapons status. Unchanged, unfired, irrelevant. When the debrief ended, she headed to her stateroom, 3 levels below the flight deck in officer country. The narrow corridor was painted the same institutional gray as every other space on the ship. She shared the stateroom with another female officer, a surface warfare lieutenant who worked in Combat Information Center. They had a cordial but distant relationship, the kind formed between people who live in proximity without actually becoming friends. Kira showered, changed into a clean flight suit, and sat at the small desk to write her post-mission notes. It was a personal habit not required by regulations. She documented every flight, every decision, every radio call. If she was ever going to be taken seriously, she needed to be beyond reproach. Perfect. Flawless. Unquestionable. The standard she held herself to was impossible, and she knew it. But the alternative was accepting that she would never be anything more than a diversity checkbox who happened to hold a type rating, and the FA-18E sleep came fitfully, interrupted by the constant sounds of flight operations. The carrier never slept. Jets launched and recovered around the clock, their engines screaming overhead as Kira tried to find rest in 3-hour increments between alerts. 3 months passed in this rhythm. Kira flew mission after mission, always in the supporting role, always professional, always competent, always overlooked. She qualified on night aerial refueling, completed carrier landing currency, maintained her weapons certifications. Her flight evaluation showed scores that would have earned praise for any other pilot. For her, they earned nothing except assignment to another mission flying high cover while someone else got to actually employ weapons. The squadron was preparing for a major operation, a coordinated strike against insurgent positions in western Iraq. Planning sessions ran for days, with mission commanders mapping out routes, timing, and weapons employment. Kira attended every brief, studied every tactical scenario, memorized every detail. She wasn't assigned to the primary strike package. She was designated spare, the aircraft that would sit on the flight deck ready to launch if someone else had a mechanical issue. The night before the strike, she sat alone in the ready room reviewing maps. The door opened and Commander Morrison walked in. He looked surprised to see her. Burning the midnight oil, Volkov. His tone wasn't hostile, just tired. The operation had consumed weeks of planning. Kira looked up from the chart. "Yes, sir. Making sure I know the package in case I need to fill in." Hammer poured himself coffee from the ready room pot, which had been sitting on the burner for hours and now resembled crude oil. "You won't need to fill in. The aircraft are solid." He said it matter-of-factly, without malice, just stating what he believed to be reality. "Understood, sir," Kira said, "but I'd rather be prepared." Hammer studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You know what your problem is, Volkov." Kira waited. This conversation had been building for months. "You're too perfect. You never make mistakes, never push back, never show any personality. The guys don't know what to do with you. You're like a robot that happens to fly Super Hornets." It was the most honest assessment anyone in the squadron had given her. Kira considered her response carefully. "With respect, sir, I don't think showing personality would change anything. I show up, I fly, I do my job, that's supposed to be enough." Hammer took a long drink of the terrible coffee. In a perfect world it would be, but this isn't a perfect world. This is a fighter squadron deployed to a carrier in a combat zone, and trust matters more than technical skill. The guys need to know you're one of them. Kira felt something cold settle in her chest. "So what do I need to do? Make crude jokes? Drink more at the bar? Pretend to be something I'm not?" She kept her voice level, professional, but there was an edge there now. Hammer heard it. "I'm not saying you need to be someone you're not. I'm saying you need to let people see who you actually are. Right now, you're a closed book, and that makes people nervous." "People are nervous because I'm a woman in a job they don't think women should have," Kira said quietly. "Nothing I do is going to change that." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Hammer nodded. "Maybe you're right, but maybe you're also not giving them enough credit. These are good men, professional aviators. They'll follow anyone who proves they can lead." He set down his coffee cup. "Get some sleep, Volkov. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left the ready room, leaving Kira alone with her charts and her thoughts. She stayed another hour, memorizing details she would probably never use, preparing for a mission she probably wouldn't fly. The strike launched at 0400 local time. Kira sat in her Super Hornet on the catapult, engines running, ready to go if needed. She watched Hammer and the strike package launch one by one, their afterburners lighting up the flight deck before they disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Then she waited. Maintenance crews moved around her aircraft, performing final checks, ensuring she was ready if the call came. It didn't come. The strike proceeded flawlessly, targets destroyed. No casualties. All aircraft returned safely. Kira shut down her engines and climbed out of the cockpit, another mission where her contribution was simply being ready to contribute. The pattern continued for another month. Then everything changed. The emergency call came at 1400 on a Tuesday afternoon. Kira was in the squadron spaces reviewing training materials when the 1MC loudspeaker crackled to life. General quarters, all hands man your battle stations. This is not a drill. The announcement sent the entire carrier into controlled chaos. Kira grabbed her flight gear and ran for the paraloft. In the ready room, the briefs were already in progress. An American convoy had been ambushed in the Anbar province. Multiple casualties. The ground force was pinned down in a dry riverbed, taking fire from 3 sides. Air support was requested immediately. Every available aircraft was launching, including Kira. "You're going up," Hammer said, his voice tight with urgency. "Load for close air support, GBU 38s and 20 Mike. You'll be on station in 22 minutes. Kira felt her heart rate spike but kept her voice steady. "Roger that, loadout and mission." A junior officer handed her a kneeboard card with the tactical details. 9-line brief, target coordinates, friendly positions, threat assessment. She memorized it in seconds while suiting up. The flight deck was organized chaos. Aircraft were being positioned, loaded, launched in rapid succession. Kira's Super Hornet was already armed, the ordnance crews having worked with incredible speed to configure weapons. She completed her pre-flight in record time, started engines, and was on the catapult 4 minutes after receiving the launch order. The cat shot sent her screaming into the afternoon sky. Kira established contact with the E-2 Hawkeye, received tactical updates, and pushed her throttles forward. The Super Hornet accelerated to 500 knots, the desert landscape below becoming a brown blur. She monitored the tactical frequency, listening to the ground forces' increasingly desperate calls for air support. They were running low on ammunition. Casualties were mounting. The enemy had superior numbers and position. 22 minutes to target felt like an eternity. Kira ran through her weapons systems, confirmed everything was armed and ready. The GBU 38s were GPS-guided with laser backup. The M61 Vulcan cannon carried 578 rounds of 20mm ammunition. She had trained for this scenario dozens of times. Now it was real. "Any Jolly Roger's flight, this is Dagger 2-1. The voice on the radio was strained, controlled panic barely held in check. The JTAC calling for help. Kira pressed transmit. "Dagger 2-1, Reaper 5-1, single ship Super Hornet 30 seconds out with precision ordnance and guns. Send your 9-line. The relief in the JTAC's voice was audible. "Reaper, targets our enemy fighting positions on 3 ridgelines, coordinates as follows." He rattled off the information with professional speed. Kira entered the data into her targeting system while simultaneously setting up her attack profile. She would need to hit all 3 positions in one pass, no time for multiple runs while friendly forces were exposed. The target area appeared below her. She could see the American vehicles in the riverbed, could see muzzle flashes from the surrounding ridges. Physics and geometry aligned in her mind. Angle of attack, release parameters, weapon sequence. This was what she had trained for. This was where technical perfection mattered. Dagger 2-1, Reaper in hot from the south. Confirm friendly positions are in the riverbed, enemy are on the high ground. The JTAC confirmed. Kira rolled inverted, pulled the nose down, and began her attack run. The targeting system showed 3 separate aim points, the GBU 38s already designated. The Super Hornet accelerated in the dive. 14,000 feet, 12,000, 10,000, release range. She pickled off 3 bombs in sequence, each one separating cleanly from the weapon stations. The aircraft bucked slightly as 2,000 pounds of munitions departed. Kira pulled out of the dive 4G recovery that pressed her into the seat and climbed back to altitude while the bombs guided themselves to impact. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 3 blooms of fire and smoke erupted on the ridgelines, precision strikes that collapsed fighting positions and silenced enemy guns. But the third position was still active. Kira could see tracers arcing toward the American vehicles. 1 GBU had missed by meters, the target position fortified beyond what the GPS accuracy could guarantee. Dagger 2-1, north position still active, Kira transmitted. Reaper is Winchester on precision, going in with guns. She didn't wait for confirmation. The Americans were dying while she talked. Kira rolled into another attack dive, this time shallower and faster. The gun sight illuminated on her heads-up display. She walked the Pipper onto the target position, tracking it as the range decreased. At 8,000 feet, she pressed the trigger. The M61 Vulcan cannon roared to life, 6,000 rounds per minute of 20mm hell. Kira held the trigger for a 3-second burst, walked the impacts across the enemy position, then pulled off hard to avoid ground fire. The northern ridgeline erupted in dust and debris. When it cleared, the position was silent. Reaper, Dagger 2-1, all targets neutralized, you are cleared off target. That was outstanding work. The JTAC's voice had shifted from panic to something else. Respect. Kira acknowledged and climbed back to altitude, her hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline flooding her system. She had just employed weapons in combat for the first time. 3 precision bombs and 1 gun run. All targets destroyed. No friendly casualties from her weapons. She had done exactly what she was trained to do, what she had been ready to do for months while flying high cover. The flight back to the carrier took 40 minutes. Kira ran through the engagement in her head, reviewing every decision, every input, looking for mistakes or areas to improve. The training had worked. All those hours in the simulator, all those practice runs on the range, had created muscle memory that functioned even under the stress of actual combat. When she trapped back aboard the Roosevelt, the maintenance crews were waiting. They saw the empty weapons stations and knew what it meant. Martinez gave her a thumbs up as she climbed out of the cockpit. The debrief was different this time. Hammer stood at the front of the ready room, but Kira was the one walking through the tactical employment. She described the engagement with technical precision, showed the video from her targeting pod, explained her decision-making process. The other pilots listened without comment. When she finished, Hammer nodded slowly. "That's how it's done," he said simply. "Good work, Reaper." It was the first compliment he had ever given her. The story should have ended there. Kira Volkov had proven herself in combat, had done exactly what every other pilot in the squadron was expected to do. She should have been accepted as an equal, integrated into the team, given the respect her skills and performance warranted. Instead, the incident became a turning point for reasons she never anticipated. 3 days after the mission, she was called to a meeting with the Carrier Air Group commander, Captain Sarah Chen, who commanded all the aviation squadrons aboard the Roosevelt. Captain Chen's office was a small space crammed with charts, awards, and the accumulated paperwork of running an air wing in a combat zone. Chen was in her late 40s, a former E-2 pilot who had fought her own battles to rise through the ranks. She gestured for Kira to sit. "I've reviewed your mission report from the Anbar rescue," Chen said without preamble. "It's being written up for a Distinguished Flying Cross. Command approval is expected within the week." Kira felt a complex mix of emotions, pride at the recognition, concern about what it meant. "Thank you, ma'am, I was just doing my job." Chen smiled slightly. "That's exactly what you were doing, and that's exactly the problem." She pulled out a folder, opened it to show a series of photographs. Kira recognized the images. They were screen captures from news footage. The Anbar rescue had been covered by embedded journalists. There was video of the ground force under fire, and there was video of Kira's Super Hornet making the gun run, captured from a soldier's helmet camera. "This footage has been on CNN for 2 days, Chen said. "The story isn't about the rescue. The story is about you. First female combat pilot to employ weapons in the Iraq theater. Social media is calling you the Angel of Anbar. Pentagon Public Affairs wants to do a full media campaign. Kira felt her stomach drop. I don't want to be a media campaign, ma'am. I want to be a pilot. Chen nodded. I know, but you don't get to choose how the Navy uses your success. You're too valuable as a symbol. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Command wants to pull you off deployment, send you back to the States for a PR tour, recruitment events, media appearances. They want to use you to encourage more women to join naval aviation. The room felt smaller suddenly. Kira had fought so hard to be treated like every other pilot. Now her success was going to be weaponized for publicity. What if I refuse, ma'am? Then you'll be assigned to a training squadron stateside anyway, Chen said bluntly. The Navy has made this decision at levels far above both of us. I'm telling you as a courtesy so you're not blindsided when the orders come through. She leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. I know this isn't what you want. I know you want to be here doing the mission. But sometimes we don't get to choose how we serve. Kira sat in silence, processing this new reality. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was about to be transformed into something she never wanted. A symbol, a poster, a recruiting tool. The orders came through 4 days later. Lieutenant Kira Volkov was being reassigned to Naval Air Station Oshina in Virginia Beach, effective immediately. She would be attached to the Fleet Replacement Squadron for FA-18 training, and she would be available for public affairs events as requested by Naval Recruiting Command. The deployment was over. Her combat career had lasted exactly 1 mission. The night before she flew off the carrier, Hammer found her in the ready room again. She was packing her gear, removing personal items from her assigned locker. This is bullshit, Hammer said without preamble. You earned your place here, you proved yourself, and they're taking you out of the fight to put you on a publicity tour. Kira looked at him, surprised by the anger in his voice. It's the Navy's decision, sir. Hammer shook his head. It's a waste of a good pilot. You could do real work here. Instead, they're going to parade you around like a trophy. He hesitated, then continued. I owe you an apology. I didn't give you a fair chance when you first got here. I bought into the bullshit about women not belonging in fighters. You proved me wrong, and I should have recognized that sooner. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. Kira felt something shift in her chest, a mix of vindication and loss. Thank you, sir. That means something. For what it's worth, Hammer said, you're one of the best pilots I've ever flown with. If things were different, I'd want you on my wing any day. He extended his hand. Kira shook it, feeling the weight of respect that had come too late to matter. She left the carrier the next morning on a C-2 Greyhound, the carrier onboard delivery aircraft that transported personnel and cargo to and from the ship. As the Greyhound climbed away from the Roosevelt, Kira looked back at the flight deck one last time, the place where she had proven herself, the place she was being forced to leave. The stateside assignment was everything she feared. Training new pilots was rewarding work, but it wasn't combat. It wasn't the mission. And the public affairs events were carefully orchestrated media performances where she was expected to smile, tell sanitized stories about her experiences, and encourage young women to join the Navy. She did it all with professional courtesy and private resentment. Months passed. Kira flew training missions, evaluated student pilots, and made appearances at air shows and recruitment events. She was good at all of it because she was good at everything she did. But the fire that had driven her was slowly being extinguished by routine and the knowledge that her combat career had been sacrificed for symbolism. Then came the medical diagnosis that changed everything. Routine flight physical, standard tests, except the results weren't standard. Kira sat in the flight surgeon's office at Naval Air Station Oshina, listening to words that felt surreal. Brain tumor. Benign, but positioned in a location that made it inoperable without significant risk. Not immediately life-threatening, but it would eventually affect her vision, her balance, her cognitive function. All the things a pilot needed. You're grounded, Lieutenant, the flight surgeon said gently. "I'm sorry, but you cannot safely operate an aircraft with this condition." The medical review board confirmed it 2 weeks later. Kira Volkov was no longer qualified for flight status. Her naval aviation career was over. She was 28 years old. The Navy offered her options. She could transition to a non-flying role. She could seek a medical retirement. She could pursue treatment and hope for a return to flight status, though the surgeon made it clear the odds were poor. Kira chose to resign her commission. If she couldn't fly, she didn't want to stay in a uniform that reminded her daily of what she had lost. The transition to civilian life was harder than any combat mission. Kira moved to Dallas, enrolled in nursing school, and tried to build a new life from the wreckage of her old one. She discovered she was good at medicine the same way she had been good at flying. The precision, the technical knowledge, the ability to remain calm under pressure. It all translated. She earned her nursing degree, specialized in emergency medicine, and found work at a trauma center. It wasn't flying, but it was saving lives. And maybe that was enough. She kept her past quiet. No one at the hospital knew she had been a naval aviator. No one knew about the combat mission or the medals in a box at home. She was just Kira, the competent nurse who worked extra shifts and never talked about herself. 3 years passed. The tumor remained stable. Kira's life settled into a rhythm that was productive if not fulfilling. She helped people. She was good at her job. She tried not to think about FA-18s or carrier decks or the life she had lost. Then came the day at the airport. Marcus Vance bleeding out on the floor, her hands moving with muscle memory that came from a different life. The combat first aid training that had never fully left her. She saved his life because that's what she was trained to do. Then she disappeared into the crowd because she didn't want the attention, didn't want to explain who she was or had been. But the video went viral. The internet detectives found her unit patch. Naval intelligence officers who followed military social media recognized the insignia. Within 48 hours, her name was circulating in veteran communities online. Reaper saved a SEAL at DFW. The old call sign, the old life, coming back like a ghost. Kira tried to ignore it. She went to work, did her shifts, pretended nothing had changed. But the messages started coming. Old squadron mates reaching out. Fellow pilots who had heard the story. And then, on a Saturday morning when she was off duty, there was a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find Marcus Vance standing in the hallway, leaning on a cane, looking healthier than he had any right to after nearly dying. "Lieutenant Volkov," he said. "Or should I say Nurse Volkov? I wanted to thank you properly." Kira started to close the door. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone would have done." Marcus put his hand on the door, not forcing it but making his point. "No, you did what a combat-trained aviator would do. And I need to know why you were working as a civilian nurse, instead of flying off carriers where you belong." She could have lied, could have told him it was none of his business, but something in his eyes, the genuine gratitude and curiosity, made her hesitate. "Can I come in?" Marcus asked. "This isn't a conversation for a hallway." Kira stepped back, let him enter her small apartment. He looked around, taking in the space that was neat and impersonal like a hotel room. No pictures, no mementos, nothing that spoke to who she really was. "I'm grounded," Kira said simply. "Medical condition. Can't fly anymore, so I became a nurse. End of story." Marcus sat down carefully, his healing injuries still causing him pain. "That's not the end of the story. I did some research. You were one of the top pilots in your class. Combat mission over Iraq that earned you a DFC. Then you got pulled for a publicity tour and disappeared. What happened?" Kira sighed, sat down across from him. "I got sick. Brain tumor, benign but inoperable in a way that matters for flight status. The Navy grounded me. I resigned. That's really all there is to it." Marcus studied her face. "You're lying. Not about the medical stuff, but about it being all there is. You don't go from combat aviator to civilian nurse without there being more to the story." He was right, of course. There was more. The resentment at being used for publicity, the frustration at never being given a fair chance until it was too late, the loss of identity when flying was taken away, the struggle to find meaning in a life that felt like a consolation prize. But Kira wasn't about to unload all of that on a stranger, even one whose life she had saved. "Why does it matter?" she asked quietly. "I saved your life. You're welcome. We're even. You can go back to your SEAL teams and I can go back to my hospital shifts, and we never have to see each other again." Marcus leaned forward. "It matters because the Navy is looking for you. The story went viral. Pentagon Public Affairs wants to do another media push. Former combat pilot now saving lives as a nurse. They think it's a great narrative." Kira felt ice in her stomach. "I don't want that. I specifically left to avoid being a symbol." Marcus nodded. "I told them that. I told them to leave you alone. But they're not going to, so I came here to give you a heads up. You're about to get a lot of attention, whether you want it or not." The media storm hit 3 days later. News crews found her hospital. Reporters called her phone, which she had to change. Social media exploded with her story. Reaper returns trended on Twitter. The hospital administration loved it initially, the positive publicity for their trauma center. But Kira hated every second. She did one press conference, carefully scripted, where she thanked people for their support and asked for privacy. It didn't help. The attention continued. Patients recognized her. Coworkers treated her differently. She had become a story instead of a person. Marcus Vance kept in touch. He understood in a way few others did what it meant to have your privacy destroyed by well-meaning publicity. They met for coffee, talked about the challenges of life after service, developed a friendship built on mutual understanding of what it meant to lose a part of yourself to circumstances beyond your control. "You should come meet some people," Marcus said one afternoon. "SEALs who medically retired. We have an informal group. Support network. People who get it." Kira considered the offer. "I'm not a SEAL," Marcus smiled. "No, but you're a warrior who got sidelined. Same tribe, different uniform." She went to the meeting. It was held in a VFW hall in Fort Worth. 12 men and 2 other women, all veterans who had been forced out of service by injuries or illness. They shared stories without judgment, talked about the struggle to find purpose outside the military, supported each other through the bad days. For the first time since leaving the Navy, Kira felt like she belonged somewhere. The support group became a regular part of her life. Through it, she met other veterans, started volunteering with organizations that helped transitioning service members, found ways to use her experience to help others navigate the same difficult path she had walked. But the past wasn't done with her yet. 6 months after the airport incident, Kira received a letter from the Department of the Navy. Inside was a formal invitation to attend a ceremony at the Pentagon. Vice Admiral Rebecca Thompson, the first female 3-star admiral in the Navy, wanted to meet her. Kira almost declined, but Marcus convinced her to go. "Sometimes you have to face the institution that failed you," he said, "if only to get closure." The Pentagon ceremony was small and private, held in an office rather than a public space. Admiral Thompson was in her early 60s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing dress whites with rows of ribbons that spoke of a distinguished career. "Lieutenant Volkov," Thompson said, rising to shake Kira's hand. "Thank you for coming. I know you didn't want this attention." Kira stood at attention, old habits. "Ma'am," Thompson smiled slightly, "at ease, this isn't official business. I asked you here because I owe you an apology on behalf of the Navy." Kira blinked, surprised. "Ma'am," Thompson gestured for her to sit. "I've reviewed your service record. You were one of our best pilots. You proved yourself in combat. And instead of letting you continue to serve, we turned you into a publicity stunt. Then when you got sick, we let you go without providing the support you deserved." It was the acknowledgement Kira had never expected to receive. "You were failed by an institution that should have valued your capabilities more than your symbolism," Thompson continued. "I can't change what happened, but I want you to know that your service mattered. That combat mission you flew saved American lives. That's your real legacy, not the media coverage or the publicity tour." Kira felt something tight in her chest loosen. "Thank you, ma'am. That means more than you know." Thompson handed her a small case. Inside was a citation and medal, the Distinguished Flying Cross that had been approved but never formally awarded. "This is 3 years late," Thompson said, "but you earned it." Ceremony was private. Just Thompson, Kira, and a Navy photographer for the official record. Thompson pinned the medal to Kira's civilian jacket, shook her hand, and said words that should have been spoken years ago. "Well done, Lieutenant. The Navy is proud of your service." When it was over, Kira walked out of the Pentagon with the medal case in her hand, feeling something that might have been closure. Her naval aviation career had been short and complicated, ended by factors beyond her control. But she had served, she had proven herself, and maybe that was enough. Back in Dallas, life continued. Kira worked her shifts at the trauma center, attended the veteran support group meetings, and slowly rebuilt a sense of purpose that wasn't defined by what she had lost. She started teaching advanced combat first aid to veteran organizations, using her medical training and military experience to prepare others for emergencies. The work was rewarding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Then came the call that would change everything again. It was Marcus, his voice urgent. "Turn on the news, any channel." Kira grabbed her remote, flipped to CNN. The breaking news banner showed footage of a commercial airliner in distress. United Flight 227 from Los Angeles to Dallas, reporting multiple systems failures, attempting to divert to a military airfield. The aircraft was a 737, carrying 147 passengers and crew. As Kira watched, the news anchor explained the situation. The pilots were incapacitated. Food poisoning, according to the early reports. A flight attendant was trying to fly the plane with help from air traffic control, but she had no aviation training beyond the basic emergency procedures. The aircraft was currently over West Texas, approaching Dice Air Force Base in Abilene. The Air Force was scrambling emergency response teams, but everyone knew the statistics. A non-pilot attempting to land a commercial airliner had never ended well. The survival rate was effectively zero. Kira watched the coverage with growing horror. She could see the disaster unfolding in real time. The flight attendant was trying her best, but flying an aircraft required skills that couldn't be talked through over a radio. Without intervention, that plane was going to crash. "They need a pilot," Marcus said on the phone, still connected. "Someone who can talk her through it. Someone who understands aircraft systems and emergency procedures." "They have air traffic controllers," Kira said. "They have airline pilots on the ground. They have the Air Force." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "None of them are you. None of them have your combination of military training and civilian emergency medical experience. You could help." Kira felt her heart rate increase. "I'm grounded. I can't fly." Marcus's response was immediate. "You don't need to fly. You need to talk. Your medical condition affects your ability to operate an aircraft. It doesn't affect your knowledge or your ability to communicate." It was crazy. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of situation where doing nothing was safer than trying and failing. But Kira had spent 3 years living safe, playing it careful, avoiding risk, and she hated it. She grabbed her keys. "I'm going to Dice. Can you make calls, get me clearance?" Marcus laughed, the sound tight with tension. "I'm already making calls. Go." The drive to Dice Air Force Base took 47 minutes at speeds that would have earned her multiple tickets if any police had been available to pull her over. Kira used the time to call the Air Force Base operations, identify herself, and explain what she wanted to do. The response was skeptical but desperate. They were out of options. By the time she arrived at the base, there was a security escort waiting. They rushed her to the control tower where the air traffic controllers were working frantically to save the flight. The senior controller, a master sergeant named Reynolds, looked at Kira with barely concealed doubt. "You're the Navy pilot?" Kira nodded. "Former pilot, currently grounded, but I have experience with emergency procedures and I understand aircraft systems." Reynolds made a decision. "Fine. We've got nothing to lose at this point. The flight attendant's name is Jessica Martin. She's scared, but she's holding it together. We need to get her on the ground in one piece." Kira put on a headset, listened to the communications. Jessica Martin's voice was strained but controlled. The passengers were screaming in the background. The aircraft was descending but too fast, the flight attendant unable to manage the throttles and flight controls simultaneously. United 227, this is Dice Tower. I have a naval aviator here who's going to help talk you through the landing. Call sign is Reaper. She's going to save your life. Are you ready to listen? Jessica's response came through broken and terrified. Yes, please. I don't know what I'm doing. Kira took a breath, centered herself, and spoke with the same calm, professional voice she had used in combat. Jessica, my name is Kira. I'm going to be with you all the way to the ground. First thing, I need you to find the autopilot controls. There should be a panel above the windscreen with buttons. Can you see it? Jessica confirmed she could see it. Kira walked her through engaging the autopilot, getting the aircraft to hold altitude and heading. Small victories. Then she addressed the bigger problem. The pilots are both incapacitated. Yes, Jessica said. They both got sick, threw up and passed out. I think it was the food. Kira filed that information away. Food poisoning meant they weren't coming back. She was the only chance this plane had. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to teach you to fly this aircraft, step by step. You're going to listen to my instructions and do exactly what I say. Can you do that? Jessica's voice cracked. I don't think I can. Kira's response was immediate and fierce. Yes, you can. You're already doing it. You've kept this plane in the air. Now you're going to land it, trust me. For the next 37 minutes, Kira Volkov did what she was born to do. She taught. She coached. She turned a terrified flight attendant into a pilot through sheer force of will and technical knowledge. She walked Jessica through reducing speed, configuring the aircraft for landing, establishing a glide path. Every instruction was clear and precise. Every correction was immediate. The control tower watched in stunned silence as the 737 lined up with the runway at Dice, descending at exactly the right angle, exactly the right speed. Kira's voice never wavered, never showed doubt. She was back in the cockpit, not physically but mentally, flying the aircraft through someone else's hands. 50 feet, Kira said. Throttles back. Let the nose rise slightly. 20 feet. Hold it steady. 10 feet. Keep the wings level. The 737 touched down on the runway with a hard bounce that collapsed one landing gear strut but kept the aircraft intact. It skidded, veered slightly left, then came to a stop 3,000 feet down the runway. Emergency vehicles swarmed immediately. Passengers evacuated via emergency slides. Kira stood in the control tower, headset in hand, watching the scene unfold. 147 people alive because she had talked a flight attendant through an impossible task. Reynolds was staring at her. That was the most amazing thing I've ever seen in 30 years of air traffic control. Kira set down the headset. I need to go, before the media finds out I was here. She walked out of the tower, got in her car, and drove back to Dallas. By the time she got home, the story was already breaking. Flight attendant saves passengers with help from mystery controller. The Air Force, to their credit, refused to identify Kira, but the veteran community knew. Marcus called. You did it again. Kira laughed, exhausted. I can't seem to stop saving people. It's becoming a habit. It's who you are, Marcus said quietly. Combat pilot, nurse, flight instructor, you save people. That's your mission, whether you're in a cockpit or not. He was right. Kira had spent 3 years mourning the loss of her flying career, defining herself by what she couldn't do. But maybe her identity was never about the aircraft. Maybe it was always about the mission, saving lives, protecting people, using her skills to make a difference. The platform didn't matter. The uniform didn't matter. The work was what mattered. The media eventually identified her. Another round of publicity, another viral story. But this time, Kira handled it differently. She did interviews, talked about the importance of emergency preparedness, used the platform to advocate for better support for medically retired veterans, turned the attention into something productive. She started a nonprofit training civilians in combat first aid and emergency response. Former military personnel taught the courses, sharing skills that could save lives in disasters or mass casualty events. The organization grew quickly, tapping into a network of veterans who wanted to continue serving even after their military careers ended. 2 years later, Kira received another call from the Pentagon. Admiral Thompson again. I have a proposition for you, Thompson said. The Navy is establishing a new program, transition support for medically retired personnel. We need someone to run it, someone who understands what these people are going through, someone who has successfully rebuilt their life after service. Kira listened as Thompson outlined the job. It would be a civilian position, working with the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Navy's Personnel Command, developing programs, creating support networks, ensuring that veterans who couldn't continue their military careers still had paths forward. Why me? Kira asked. I walked away from the Navy. I'm not exactly the poster child for institutional loyalty, Thompson laughed. You're exactly who we need. You understand the system's failures because you experienced them. You built something meaningful from nothing, and you have credibility with the veteran community in ways a bureaucrat never could. Will you consider it? Kira thought about her life in Dallas, the trauma center, the nonprofit, the support group, all good work, all important. But this was a chance to effect change at a scale she couldn't achieve on her own. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. I get complete autonomy to build the program the right way. No publicity tour, no media campaigns, just real support for real people. Deal, Thompson said immediately. The program launched 6 months later. The Volkov Initiative, though Kira had argued against using her name, Thompson insisted. It provided comprehensive support for medically retired service members, job training, education assistance, mental health resources, peer support networks, everything Kira wished had existed when she needed it. The program grew rapidly. Other branches of the military adopted similar models. Within 3 years, the Volkov Initiative had helped thousands of veterans successfully transition to civilian life. It was featured in congressional testimony as a model for how the military should support its people. And through it all, Kira never forgot where she came from. She still worked shifts at the trauma center, still taught combat first aid courses, still met with the veteran support group. She had found a way to serve that didn't require a cockpit or a uniform. Her impact was measured in lives changed, people helped, veterans who found purpose after service. One evening, Kira was invited to speak at the Naval Academy. She stood in front of a room full of midshipmen, young people preparing for military careers, and told them her story. Not the sanitized version, the real one. The struggles, the failures, the medical grounding that ended her flying career, the hard work of finding meaning after loss. Your military career will end, she told them. Maybe it ends in retirement after 30 years. Maybe it ends in combat. Maybe it ends in a flight surgeon's office with a diagnosis you never saw coming, but it will end. And when it does, you'll have a choice. You can define yourself by what you lost, or you can define yourself by what you do next. I was a fighter pilot for 3 years. I've been working on veteran transition issues for 6 years. Which career had more impact? Which one saved more lives? I loved flying. I'll always love it. But my mission didn't end when I lost my wings. It just changed platforms. The midshipmen listened in silence. After the speech, several approached her with questions. One young woman, a senior preparing to enter flight school, shook Kira's hand with determination. I want to fly fighters, she said, but I'm scared I won't be good enough, that I'll be treated differently because I'm a woman. Kira looked at her, seeing herself a decade earlier. You probably will be treated differently. It probably won't be fair, but here's what I learned. You don't prove yourself to earn their respect. You prove yourself because you're a professional, and that's the standard you hold yourself to. Their respect will come or it won't. Either way, you'll know you did the work. The young woman nodded, absorbing the advice. Did you ever regret it, joining the Navy, going through all that difficulty? Kira considered the question carefully. No, because even though my flying career was short, even though I faced challenges I shouldn't have had to face, I became who I am because of that experience. I learned I could operate under pressure. I learned I could adapt when everything I planned for was taken away. Those lessons have value that goes beyond any single job or career. She paused, then smiled. Plus, I got to fly FA-18s off aircraft carriers. Whatever else happened, no one can take that away from me. Years passed. The Volkov Initiative expanded internationally, partnering with allied militaries to improve transition support. Kira became a recognized expert in veteran affairs, testified before Congress, advised military leadership on policy. But she never lost sight of the individual stories. Every veteran who came through the program was more than a statistic. They were people navigating the same difficult transition she had survived. She made time to meet with them personally, to share her own experiences, to let them know they weren't alone. The support group in Fort Worth continued. Marcus was still part of it, though he had returned to active duty after his recovery, now working as an instructor for SEAL teams. One Saturday morning, the group met as usual. They talked about jobs and struggles and small victories. At the end of the meeting, Marcus stood up. "I have an announcement. The Navy's doing a 30-year anniversary commemoration of women in combat aviation. They want Kira to be the keynote speaker." The group looked at Kira. She groaned. "More publicity," Marcus shook his head. "More recognition. For you and everyone else who fought those battles, you don't have to do it. But it might mean something to the people coming up behind you." Kira thought about the midshipmen who had asked about regrets, thought about all the women currently flying fighters off carriers, following a path that had been partially cleared by people like her. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it." The ceremony was held at Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland. Kira stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of naval aviators, active duty and retired, representing decades of progress and struggle. She spoke about the history, about the women who had fought for the right to fly in combat, about the challenges that remained, and about the mission that continued. "We remember the past not to dwell on injustice," she said, "but to honor those who persevered through it and to commit ourselves to doing better. Every person in this room, regardless of gender, earned their wings through skill and determination. That's the standard. That's what matters, not publicity, not symbolism, competence and character." The applause was genuine. After the speech, dozens of people approached her, retired pilots who remembered her combat mission, current aviators who had heard the stories, young officers just starting their careers. Each conversation reinforced what Kira had learned. Her impact wasn't measured by flight hours or missions flown. It was measured by the paths she had helped clear and the people she had helped along the way. That evening, Kira walked along the flight line at Pax River, watching the sun set over rows of parked aircraft. FA-18s, EA-18G Growlers, newer models she had never flown. The flight line looked the same as it had a decade ago, but everything had changed. She was no longer the young lieutenant fighting for acceptance in a squadron that didn't want her. She was someone who had found a different way to serve, a different mission that mattered just as much. Her phone buzzed. A text from the Volkov Initiative office. Another veteran successfully placed in a job. Another person finding their path forward. Kira smiled. This was her carrier deck now. These were her missions. The sky overhead was clear and endless, the same sky she had flown through years ago, but she didn't need to be in a cockpit to appreciate it. As she stood there, a young woman in a flight suit approached. Lieutenant Junior grade, wearing the wings of a naval flight officer. "Ms. Volkov, I just wanted to say thank you. Your work with the Volkov Initiative helped my brother. He was a Marine who got injured in Afghanistan. He went through your program and now he's a firefighter. You saved his life in a different way." Kira shook her hand. "I'm glad we could help. Tell him to stay in touch. The support doesn't end when the program does." The young officer hesitated, then asked, "Do you miss it? Flying?" Kira looked at the aircraft on the flight line, feeling the familiar pull of that old life. "Every day," she said honestly. "But I've learned that missing something doesn't mean you made the wrong choice in moving forward. It just means what you left behind mattered." The officer nodded and walked back to her squadron spaces. Kira remained on the flight line a little longer, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow she would return to Dallas, to her work with the initiative, to the veteran support groups and the trauma center shifts and the ongoing mission of helping people navigate difficult transitions. It was a good life, not the one she had planned, but maybe that was the point. Life rarely followed the flight plan. What mattered was how you adapted when the mission changed. She thought about Marcus bleeding out in the airport, about Flight 227 and the terrified flight attendant, about thousands of veterans who had found new purpose through the program she had built. All of it connected, all of it part of the same mission she had started when she first put on a uniform. Reaper, she said quietly to herself, using the call sign that still defined her in ways she couldn't fully explain. Mission complete, returning to base. But even as she said it, she knew the mission was never really complete. There was always another veteran who needed help, always another person struggling with the transition she had survived, always more work to be done. And that was fine. That was the mission. She walked back to her rental car as night settled over the base. Behind her, the aircraft sat silent on the flight line, waiting for their next missions. Ahead of her, the road stretched toward tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. Kira Volkov had been a fighter pilot for 3 years and a veteran advocate for 10. She would continue the work for as long as it mattered. Because in the end, that's what service meant. Not the uniform or the platform or the specific job, just the commitment to use your skills to make a difference in whatever way you could. And somewhere in the Dallas night, her wings sat in a display case in her apartment. Gold Naval Aviator wings, carrier qualified, earned through skill and proven in combat. They represented who she had been. The work she did every day represented who she had become. Both were real, both mattered, and that was enough.